from that ranking in 2020 up through present day, where Newsom is probably, I would say, Beijing's most powerful political ally in America. To say that strategy here is to cultivate allies like Newsom, while Washington has a more hawkish China policy, so that when these officials, become congressmen or even members of the cabinet or president one day, um, Beijing will have an ally in the Capitol and possibly in the White House. At one point, the authorities even shut the lights off at a venue where Burns and his embassy staff were doing an event. So these are some really aggressive tactics.
Hi everyone. Today our guest is Jimmy Quinn, who is a national security correspondent with the National Review. Hi Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on with you.
Yes, I've noticed your very interesting articles and posts and tweets. You investigated China's influence in New York, and that's a huge topic. You've been dealing with it for a long time. I wanted to ask you, could you tell us a little bit what was going on there, and how did the CCP try to exert influence over New York politicians?
I think we need to situate this conversation, first of all, in this broader reckoning that Americans right now are having with Beijing's political influence in our country. Uh, Ever since the end of the Trump administration, when we've seen this pivot to a more hawkish policy regarding the Chinese Communist Party, and this wake up call, effectively, to what Beijing's ambitions are on the world stage, that was accompanied by a series of warnings by several high level government officials, primarily Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, but also other officials in the Trump administration that has continued up through present day. And the essence of that warning is that the Chinese Communist Party's United Front political influence actors are trying to reach Americans. And there's nothing necessarily illegal about that in our system. Americans, of course, can engage with whomever they want. And that's probably a good thing, to have a free and open society where people can choose to talk to whoever they choose to engage with. But the problem is there's an asymmetry here where this party state entity, this foreign authoritarian regime, is trying to reach Americans directly and basically not present itself as what it actually is, which is a dictatorship that is trying to influence Americans to adopt policies that it favors, right? So, for instance, one of the main mechanisms for this is influence through sister city agreements, which sounds like a pretty innocuous thing, where a Chinese municipality forges basically a friendship agreement with an American town. But the asymmetry there is these are often organized, or these are always organized, rather, on the Chinese side by the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, which is a United Front CCP actor that basically leverages these agreements to get Americans to do its bidding. And this is a warning that's been sounded time and time again by intelligence officials, by the State Department. The concern is that these sister city agreements are a springboard and sort of a pressure point, which the CCP uses to get Americans to say, turn their backs on Taiwan, or to not, do anything with the Tibetan community or with Uyghurs or with any other groups that are obviously basically in the crosshairs of the Chinese Communist Party. So what we saw in New York very recently, but this goes back many years actually, but the awakening has really only started in the past 2 years, is that several high-profile politicians here have extensive relationships both with unofficial United Front linked actors and also the Chinese consulate and the Chinese consul general Huang Ping here in Manhattan, who basically, and we can get into this, has tried to throw his weight around to prevent New Yorkers from engaging with whomever they choose. And so that's obviously a problem if a foreign dictatorship and America's primary geopolitical adversary is convincing officials in one of the most important cities of the world, America's largest city, uh, to adopt positions that are favored by Beijing.
Yeah, and I can imagine the Chinese embassy tries to leverage it, maybe when Taiwanese officials stay for a night or two in New York, right?
That's exactly right. And I reported on this earlier this year. There's one incident where former Taiwanese president Tsai Ing-wen was passing through New York on a very quick trip to the city. And this was in March of 2023. She met with some federal lawmakers while she was here. And there was also a banquet held in her honor that was organized by local Taiwanese expat groups. And it was really interesting because at the time I noticed that New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy was there. And this took place directly in New York City. But it was strange that New York City Mayor Eric Adams did not attend, and also that New York Governor Kathy Hochul was not there. And that could have been for any number of reasons. These are very busy officials. They could be traveling, they could have other meetings, and so on and so forth. But I did a little bit of digging through New York State's Freedom of Information law. And what had happened, at least in Adams's case, was that the Chinese consul general had sent him a letter basically instructing him to not go to this banquet and to not do anything with the Taiwanese president while she was in town. And I should add a note of caution here. I don't have proof that this is why Adams didn't attend the event, but the sequencing of this is pretty significant in and of itself. The letter came in a few hours before the banquet. Adams was invited to attend this event. And if you look at his official schedule for the day, he did not have anything else going on at this time. But this basically capped off what appears to be a weeks long lobbying campaign by the Chinese consul general Huang Ping, where he called various officials in Adams's administration. He sent letters through one of his contacts there, this senior advisor to Adams, who's been with him for about a decade. Her name is Winnie Greco. And effectively, if that's what led Adams not to go, this was a massive success. And what one expert told me is that city officials, U.S. government officials, should avoid even the perception that something improper was leading to their decision making around such important diplomatic events and engagement with the Taiwanese. Um, but it really just goes to show um, this is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party is trying to do when it engages in subnational political influence. It uses every point of leverage that it has to forge these relationships. And then when the time comes to pressure everyone from members of Congress down to mayors and city council members and even PTA board members to basically avoid doing things that Beijing doesn't want it to do. And that should be of concern to every American.
Okay, but then the question is very clear. Don't those people know better, or are they so naive, or they just woke up recently, maybe after your publications? I mean, they should know better. It's not a big secret what you and I are discussing now. It's been known for quite some time that Chinese are very active in this sphere.
And I mean, I obviously request comment from New York City Hall every time I write a story about Mayor Adams's engagements with United Front officials or United Front linked actors or Chinese government officials. Um, and often they don't respond, they don't provide a statement for comment. and when that could, help clear things up or at least present their perspective on things. Um, and when they do respond, they have claimed that Mayor Adams takes the Chinese Communist Party's threats very seriously. But I just frankly haven't really seen that in practice. There's a pattern of unfettered, blind engagement with Chinese government officials, and this unbalanced approach where Adams frequently encounters the Chinese consul general at events around Manhattan, and his top aides go to the Chinese consulate general. But there's no simultaneous engagement with the Taiwanese side. Uh, I mean, just looking at these data points, it would suggest that City Hall has something to fear by engaging with the Taiwanese side. And by the way, it's not only the mayor. I don't mean to only pick on Mayor Adams. Governor Kathy Hochul also has a history of engagement with United Front linked entities, certain chambers of commerce that have on their boards the members of Chinese state-owned enterprises, and she's spoken at those events before that they've had their annual gala events. So yeah, you would think that people would be more aware of this, and the federal government has issued many warnings. And obviously, we're not privy to what conversations take place behind closed doors. But either way, these officials by now should know better. And it is pretty, I think, significant that this continues to happen.
Dear viewer, this important video deserves wider exposure. Please help me fight algorithm suppression by liking, commenting, and sharing it widely. Together, we will make a difference.
So, has there been any change after your publications? As you just mentioned, should they know better? Do they know better now?
I honestly couldn't really say, but I mean, judging by recent comments by some officials at City Hall, such as Adams's International Affairs Commissioner, Edward Mermelstein, no, it does seem like this pattern of blind engagement does continue. New York recently signed the renewal of a sister city agreement, or rather, I should say, a friendship and cooperation agreement with the city of Shanghai. There was recently a ceremony that Mermelstein attended at the Chinese Consulate General about a month ago to celebrate New York's longstanding sister city agreement with the city of Beijing. And Mermelstein has also promised, on behalf of the Adams administration, further engagement with Guangdong in China to forge a closer relationship. And it's interesting that he's choosing that part of China because there's a big push by one of the organizations I mentioned before, the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, to basically use the Bay Area near Hong Kong. They're calling it the Greater Bay Area. As a way to reach out to other municipalities in America. They recently had a big conference that Governor Gavin Newsom attended in
Yes.
California, where numerous Chinese officials attended. No, it seems like if you are a big city or a big state and you have already adopted a pro-Beijing perspective, this work continues. And by the way, I would say that this is partly because the State Department under the Biden administration has not issued public warnings about this. The intelligence community in 2022, so during the Biden administration, issued a bulletin explaining the problem with subnational political influence with the Chinese Communist Party and the various risks involved. But for whatever reason, State Department officials and other top-ranking national security officials have declined to do so in recent years. So that paired with the broader, reopening of diplomatic exchange between the U.S. and China over the past year since Biden and Xi's meeting at San Francisco, and there's something to be said about high-level dialogue. But when you're dealing with the CCP, which is a Leninist party state, you need to basically guard against United Front efforts to influence American politicians and to wield this sort of malign influence, which we haven't seen. Um, but that broader dialogue has opened the floodgates to a range of United Front actors coming to the United States and continuing and even doing more of these activities in the past few months.
Yeah, you mentioned Governor Gavin Newsom. He was mentioned again in this ranking of American governors that Mike Pompeo was discussing in February 2020, and it ranked American governors depending on how friendly, neutral, or hostile they were to China. And surprisingly, I looked it up. Gavin Newsom was ranked as unclear. So where does this change, this about face, come from? That he's now a big friend, even of personally Xi Jinping.
That's a really good question. And I wish I had a clearer answer to the motives behind this pivot to engaging more United Front actors directly. And I can venture a guess and try to game this out with you here. But yeah, from that ranking in 2020 up through present day, where Newsom is probably, I would say, Beijing's most powerful political ally in America. Adams is a pretty prominent politician. He leads a major city, obviously. But Newsom is the governor of one of our country's largest states and largest economic powerhouses. And he has shown that he is very willing to cultivate a very close relationship with Beijing at the expense of advocating America's interests. We saw this when he went to China back in October. He met with Xi Jinping, did not raise human rights directly with him. I don't believe he raised the fentanyl crisis either with General Secretary Xi. He said that he only raised these issues in a meeting with the CCP's top diplomat, Wang Yi, because he claimed the State Department advised him to not raise these thornier issues with Xi Jinping. So clearly, Newsom is willing to pull his punches, and that makes a lot more sense considering the United Front actors that he engages with regularly. During his 9-day trip to China, he attended a dialogue that was co-hosted by this group I keep mentioning, the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, which kind of presents itself as like an independent nonprofit type thing, but is actually an arm of the party that seeks to malignly influence U.S. politicians. So this was one of these climate change dialogues. And we've seen that the party has used climate as an issue to kind of maintain relationships with state and local officials, while the broader relationship between the central Chinese government and the federal government remains frosty. I think it's probably fair to say that the strategy here is to cultivate allies like Newsom, while Washington has a more hawkish China policy, so that when these officials, become congressmen or even members of the cabinet or president one day, Beijing will have an ally in the Capitol and possibly in the White House. Um, and one of the key entities involved in facilitating these exchanges is it's a think tank that focuses on California-China climate cooperation. And they have done a lot with the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, extending back several years. And Jerry Brown, the former governor of California, is one of the founders of that institute. And, he's got a pretty close relationship with Newsom. And that's where some of these engagements have come from. So, I can't say for a certainty that that's where Newsom got connected to United Front entities. However, I mean, clearly there's engagement with this group that works regularly with the CPA FFC, and that played a role in the climate change dialogue that took place in October, and it has continued to play a role with the conference 2 months ago to support Beijing's Greater Bay Area concept, to forge a closer relationship, basically between the authoritarian Hong Kong government, which has turned that city into a city that resembles most of China, um, and continue that engagement with local California actors, as well as Newsom, who attended and spoke at this conference.
So what you're saying is actually very depressing. Like, what is it that Americans can do, or the government, or the citizens? I mean, is there much that you can do?
I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. Media reporting always helps, of course, and I try to do as much reporting on this as possible. Um, and Americans, like I said at the start of our conversation, they should be able to talk to whoever they want to talk to. But the US government, of course, has an interest in making sure that diplomatic engagements are reciprocal, fully reciprocal, because when our diplomats go to China, they are constantly harassed. They cannot meet with the people that they want to meet with. It's very tough for them to do their jobs. And the current U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, he's really doing his best. But he did an interview with the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, explaining how some of this harassment works. And if I recall correctly, at one point, the authorities even shut the lights off at a venue where Burns and his embassy staff were doing an event. So these are some really aggressive tactics. But I would say that the U.S. government probably needs to put some stricter regulations in place when it comes to United Front officials visiting from China, coming to the United States. I'm not sure why we're issuing visas to the Chinese People's Association for friendship with foreign countries. So far, several of their officials have come to America in 2024 and held various meetings. There was even one meeting at the National Museum of the Air Force at an Air Force base in Ohio. That was a reception that they were invited to that an American group had organized. Nevertheless, it begs asking why the State Department is issuing visas for this. One thing is tougher visa restrictions for officials involved in political influence organizations. Another thing that would go a great length to support more sunlight being shed on the situation. Is ensuring that all sister city agreements, the text of these agreements, the memoranda of understanding are made public, that they're accessible in a database that any American can log on to and visit. I think that would be very helpful. There's legislation in Congress right now. I think it was Senator Marsha Blackburn who proposed it, to basically commission a study on sister city agreements to understand the extent to which they are actually shaping subnational U.S. relations with the Chinese Communist Party. I think that's a great start. And there's a lot more work that certainly needs to be done here.
Yeah, because otherwise we have extreme cases like the mayor of Barstow, and I'm pronouncing correctly, who went who went to China, was praising Xinjiang and saying in camera he's living the dream, surrounded by Chinese. I mean, this is just unbelievable.
That's absolutely right, and there needs to be greater awareness. In the case that you're talking about, there is a mayor from California who went to Xinjiang, where the party is carrying out genocide and crimes against humanity against Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities. And he went there to some trade show. He was brought, I think, if I'm correct about this, I think it's the Chinese consul general or the consulate general in Los Angeles. But I would think it's fair to assume that there's a United Front actor involved in some of this. And he went on this junket to Xinjiang, and yeah, he was praising the Chinese government, which is very jarring to see. It's a bit disturbing, frankly, and you have to wonder if there was greater awareness, if the State Department was issuing more public warnings about this, if it had a larger staff to help brief mayors and other local and state officials, if this sort of thing would continue to happen. It's really unfortunate that this is happening now. And clearly there's a policy failure here that needs to be resolved.
Actually, there is already a good precedent, like I think the consulate in Houston, right? That was just shut down.
Yeah, that's right. Back in 2020 at the end of the Trump administration.
It would be even better. Yes.
Yeah, and the concern there was espionage, and
Yes.
Obviously there's a lot of United Front activity taking place in Houston. There's an overseas Chinese service center, which is overseen by the United Front Work Department. So, I mean, there needs to be an effort to find reciprocity in the U.S.-China diplomatic relationship. That doesn't exist right now, and United Front work has to be viewed as part of the broader U.S.-China diplomatic balance. It's not extraneous. It's not something that exists, outside of official PRC government to U.S. federal relations. There's an imbalance, and it very drastically needs to be corrected, because otherwise this dictatorship will continue to shape U.S. elite perceptions of that dictatorship's malign policies. And that will be to the grave detriment of our national security.
Dear Studio Asian, if you've gotten that far and not commented nor liked, shame on you. Also sub for more Studio Asia.
My last question is, what are you going to be focusing on the rest of this year and maybe next year? What's your research? What's your interest for the remaining half year of 2024?
So right now, I'm just kind of in a holding pattern. I'm sort of waiting to see what happens with Adams's administration. There's a federal investigation, and reportedly, that federal investigation involves a look at Adams's trips to China over the past decades. I personally know of at least 2 trips that he took to China in an official capacity. This was before he was mayor. But there's some reporting that he took 7 trips to China, and apparently the federal prosecutors are looking into that as part of a broader probe into his campaign for mayor and his mayoral administration. So we'll have to see what happens there. I'm also very interested to see how Newsom continues to approach his country's relationship with China. Clearly, he's shown a great interest in forging a much, much closer relationship with Beijing and its proxies in America. So we'll have to see how that all shapes up.
Great. Jimmy, thank you very much for your time and your insights.
Thank you, Richard, for having me. Really appreciate the great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have so many other explosive interviews on this and similar topics. Please check out my channel.